the importance of purpose. So this video I've split into a more practical second half and a first half which will cover more of the theory around purpose and conscious belief. So the first thing I want to ask is, how do you think Roman soldiers went into battle? What separates us and them? Because if I gave you a sword and I told you to go into battle, you would be unable to. I would be unable to. We'd say, can we really do this? Is there really a point? We're just fighting someone else's war. But for Roman soldiers, this was an extremely easy decision to make. In fact, well, from what we know at least, because we weren't in their minds, but it was very easy for them to just go into battle, risk dying, risk being amputated, killing other people, amputating other people. And so what's the difference between us and them? And I think most modern thinking kind of revolves around this whole testosterone's fallen and we have low testosterone and etc, etc, etc. But I think purpose is actually extremely overlooked. And I would actually argue that purpose drives most changes in testosterone. Because think about, for them, they believed it was their country, it was their gods, they were noble, they were the best, they needed to win, and they were doing something great. And that's how I think they went into battle. But for us, we think, oh, this whole belief thing is a cope, and what's the point? And it's all just, believing in our country and our God, and it doesn't really mean anything to me, and it's just cope, right? And this is where we differ. See, today we think everything is cope. We know that all these things, they're just all this purpose, all these things we tell ourselves that the Roman soldiers told themselves, it's just cope. And so we're extremely, extremely existentially unstable. We're very unstable. We don't have a proper framework, really. We're smart enough to see that every belief we create, every purpose we give ourselves, apart from some lucky people who maybe still think like Roman soldiers, we struggle. We don't know, what do we believe? What do we do? What's the point of life? And so we're just very unstable. I mean, that's just how it is for us. And the issue is the purpose is really important. It's obvious that, just from its effects, I think, this hasn't been proven scientifically as far as I know, but it probably has a huge effect on testosterone. Because it's obvious to me, if I give myself a purpose and I know what I'm doing, then all of my negativity suddenly dies down. It doesn't matter how I feel. You can endure unimaginable pain if you have a purpose. And this is just kind of an intuitively obvious fact. But then, of course, the question is how? How do we have a purpose? And not just how can we have a purpose, but how can we have a purpose while knowing that any purpose we give ourselves is a deliberate choice? Because purpose is supposed to be something you believe, right? And notice I say you with quote marks, because then the question becomes who even believes in this. But it's a sort of battle between these existential thoughts of, oh, everything's a cope and it's pointless and there's no real meaning or purpose, versus this side of you that wants to believe in some cause. And the ideal scenario is therefore you have a purpose and you know that you chose it. And so how is it possible to really get to that? And so I think that one of the ways is really to be able to escape the mind, because if you can sit above this negativity and this idea that everything's cope and there's no meaning, you can potentially push through to a point where you can have a purpose and know that you chose it without feeling like there's some sort of issue there. And so the other option is, of course, apart from just continuing to struggle with the same thing, is to try and go back to being a Roman soldier, sort of to make yourself stupid again, to try and cope, right? But that seems almost impossible anyway, because we know it's cope. And so what do we do at this point? And I've had a lot of experience with this personally. The past few months have been a lot of me questioning the purpose and the meaning of life. And I think one of the things I sort of realized is from just questioning reality, doing all of this, I realized sort of everything is just concept. And so the concept that everything is cope versus the concept of some sort of purpose that you're aspiring to, why should the idea that everything is cope sit above that? And so it's this ability to question your mind and develop some growth that I would call spiritual growth, but a lot of people might take issue with calling it that, but some sort of growth. Because when you develop that, then you can start to become more able to basically do what I said, which is to choose a purpose and to be okay with somehow believing, but also knowing that you chose to believe. And of course, if you're smart and careful, you'll realize who the you is that believes in purpose is almost like at the heart of this question. And so, of course, you can tell I'm kind of struggling to explain what am I even trying to say here? Ego death, like some spiritual experience, like what really can allow purpose for us. And so I think the roundup really for this video is that you need purpose, but you also need to kind of consider existential problems, right? Because we think purpose is cope, so then the question becomes, how do we grow past this, right? How do we grow past this fear that everything is meaningless and this sort of like mental block we have on establishing a purpose in our life? And so really, I think this is the practical section of the video now. There's 3 major things that I did and that I think you should do. The first one is questioning concept versus actuality or reality. And this is something I borrowed and applied to my own life and that I experienced huge growth from. And because you can sort of label every time your mind generates a concept to label something. Like you look at your hand and your table, you say this is a table. But that's a concept that your mind generated, and it sounds rather stupid, but if you keep doing it, you can start to apply it to things that actually do affect you. Like this sort of nihilistic thinking that there's no meaning and there's no purpose, there's no point of doing anything. That's a concept. And so when you realize that, then you become kind of confused, because then it's like, well, what is life? What do I even believe in? That's a concept. And so you can keep following it down the rabbit hole. And eventually these existential sort of fears, they can weaken. I think the next thing is probably choosing a convincing and motivating purpose that you really want. What's something that you really want? And this is kind of a tough one to think about, because, most people, they don't really sit down and think about this ever. And they sort of skip over it like, yeah, okay, purpose, establish a purpose, but it's actually extremely important. You need a compelling and convincing purpose. So what's something that you really believe in and want? And until you have that, then there's not really much in it for you. I think the third thing is also sort of just the brute force of repeating things like an affirmation. So if you establish a purpose, then just being able to repeat it continuously to yourself like an affirmation can establish it in your mind. And so it can become, you can wake up and think, okay, this is my purpose. And I think affirmations, I've already made videos about this, but I'm going to sort of do it in another video. But I think that's also something very important, which people don't really normally associate with purpose. But I think it's quite helpful.